Good morning, everyone. I regret I missed Peter Allen's speech and marked most of Michael's. But politics, sometimes people use the word soundbite as a pejorative. Sometimes actually politics, being good at soundbites is kind of a real skill. And that soundbite from what he said, electric vehicles is the future, I'm very glad I heard, apropos of what we're doing. Can I just give a very broad and informal update, or sense of just where we are on certain various issues? And as I said, I'm also looking forward to, like Michael, to the many questions and answer session where I might be able to hear other thoughts. I want to give a very broad perspective, just informing people as I see it where we are on a range of different energy-related issues. And very broad going down to more specific. Firstly, the background drivers of what's happening, policy drivers. Obviously, climate change policy and actions, or international cooperation, has gone through a very difficult year. And it's no real view that it's going to be any necessarily clearer or easier in the next year. But coming from a European Union perspective, which I can only really account for, it seems to me that we still have a really solid structure, solid political support for action in both the international negotiations as also internally ourselves. While it's unlikely we're going to get some sort of internationally binding agreement in Cancun, while it's clear that the lack of legal certainty around what came out of Copenhagen is a difficulty and a problem, I still believe in probably a slightly longer time frame, maybe 2 or 3 years, 1, 2 or 3 years, whichever time it takes, there is still international commitment and political commitment at a high level for the sort of radical actions that are going to be needed to address our climate change challenge. And so it's not gone away. It's gone through a difficult phase, but it will be a policy driver for anyone looking at energy and what the likely future is to be. Similarly, there's been a change in the last year in the whole energy security agenda. I mean, there's no doubt that the kind of the evolving information about shale gas as a possible alternative fuel, particularly from the US, but also possibly elsewhere, is a significant development. There are questions marked obviously around environmental impacts and so on, and obviously it's not going to overcome what I see the fundamental energy resource challenge we have in a peak in global oil production, because if you were to convert gas to liquids on the scale we'd need to kind of meet up the future transport needs, it just wouldn't work, even with the volume of shale gas that the US thinks that they will now be able to tap into. But it is a significant development. And for me, I suppose, for us just immediately, for our country, it provides just a bit of a breather. It provides us, I think, a window of opportunity where we will have slightly lower gas prices, and by dint of that, because it's our electricity generation system being dominated by gas production, slightly lower, slightly more stable electricity prices, which gives us just a bit of a room, a bit of a window of opportunity to make what I see the investments that are needed in efficiency and renewables as for this country's the best bet, the best investment, the area we need to progress. I want to maybe just very briefly tap into what's happening at the European Union level. We had an energy ministers meeting, a council ministers meeting on Monday last, and my general sense is the council is working well. It's fairly tight. It's actually one of the more active councils in the European Union. It has had a lot of legislation recently in those 20-20-20 commitments that back up the overall European climate change commitment. It is a council that actually has a fairly active brief, and it had a very good outgoing commissioner in my mind, Commissioner Peebles. And my sense is that the new commissioner and his team, and there was a complete change of teams which we were worried about, because I think the outgoing team was a very good one in the Commission. But I have a sense that the new team is bedding in very well, that the Commissioner, that there's a good sense of continuity from the previous Commission into this one, and while obviously the Commission has been slow to get up and running, the overall Commission, my sense is that the Energy Council and the Energy Commissioner has bedded in well, and as I said to him in my intervention on Monday, I think he's on the right track. And that does have a huge policy implication for us as an island and for other markets, in the European Union, and that's just my sense of where it's at. It's quite a, I mean, the European Union is a tricky space at the present time. The tensions around the Eurozone, the real concern around that's affecting all European policy environments is there, but the Energy Council, I'd say, is probably one of the more robust ones and quite determined in its intention, by and large, towards pushing renewables and efficiency as some of our key drivers. There isn't, we were talking on Monday about what our strategy is for the next time period in the Council. There is a proposal, and we're looking now at setting out a strategy 2011 to 2020. But I don't think it's a kind of a review of strategy per se, or a major turnaround in progress. I think actually there was a recognition, Commissioner himself said on Monday, that really we're in an implementation phase in this Commission. It's a matter of actually getting through delivering on the policy targets that were set in recent years. There is a fair bit of work to be done in the area of energy efficiency. Of those three 2020 targets, the energy efficiency one is the more vague. It hasn't been translated into very specific, real commitments in terms of whether it's primary energy reduction you're measuring, or whether it's or what each national commitment is, or whether there's international transactional arrangements around that. We've done that work on renewables. We've done it very well or very extensively in the emissions targets. But the efficiency target is one that there needs to be a fair bit of work. And there isn't really clear consensus yet. There was a number of different views I heard in the Council on Monday. So I'd be slightly worried that that's the one that needs to be really concentrated on, needs to be bolted down tight. And in my mind, the more ambitious, the more aggressive, the more mandatory, the better. Because all of the analysis, all those McKinsey cost abatement curves show you that it's the best economic investment you can make. Simple metaphor, you're running your bath to put the plug in first. So I see Europe, if it could introduce such a real strong mandatory system that actually helps governments, helps ministers like myself, do the right thing economically anyway. So that needs to be done. There's also within our agenda an agreement on Monday to start looking towards 2050. It'll take time, and it's obviously long-term thinking. You can't plan completely easily that way. But we are starting to look at that. I'm looking towards the kind of 80%, 90% targets that we're going to need to make of reductions in emissions to meet the climate change challenge we have. So that's where the Council's at, just coming fresh out of the kind of Council meeting as way of background information. In terms of where we're at, and I'll divide very simply, broadly, without going over all the details. I'm sure Michael covered a lot of the regulatory issues, but just breaking down between heat, transport and electricity production. On heat, first of all, because it is the most important. It's overlooked, but it's actually the area of greatest opportunity in my mind, and greatest emission savings, greatest energy improvement. On the domestic side, in the Home Energy Savings Scheme and the Warmer Homes Scheme, they're bedding in quite well, is my sense. The likes of the Home Energy Savings Scheme, we're getting about €1 million a week applications coming in. We've already spent about 22 million this year. And for me, it's the perfect counter-stimulus programme for government, because for every million we spend, there's probably 2 or 3 million of private sector investment. It's involving the very kind of construction workers that are the biggest difficulty after the downturn. So it's a really good project. It's working well, as is the Warmer Home schemes. But we're looking to switch it, or not switch it, but to evolve it into a much more complex and extensive retrofit programme for our commercial, our public buildings, as well as our domestic buildings. And I'm going to government shortly with a retrofit scheme which will set out our ambition in doing that, to look at using our building energy rating infrastructure now, which I think has evolved quite well, with an obligation scheme on utilities and other energy companies to actually deliver energy demand reductions for their clients on an obligatory basis, backed up with funding to support such measures in social housing or in our own public buildings, or indeed in other new innovative retrofit schemes. But it's designed to kind of get away from a grant-based system over time. It will take a bit of time to wean off one and onto another, and towards a system that really encourages energy service companies and people who are in this room to use their ingenuity and variety of different technologies, rather than us being prescriptive, to deliver energy efficiency reductions that we need to make. And I want to be, as I said earlier on, really ambitious, particularly in our public buildings programme, because that's where we have set ourselves very high energy efficiency targets. We need to soup up Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland to be able to help to do that. We need to get additional resources in there. It's taken us longer, and it's difficult in a time of public sector embargo to get the sort of staff in and get that really kicking. But I think we're on the right track. I think we have the broad approach is the correct one. And as I said, we'll do it in a way where we test it. If it's not working, just slightly adjust it. It won't be a one-size-fits-all immediate solution. It'll be something that's probably going to take a couple of years to bed in and to adapt. But we've good people in the department working on it, good people in Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland. Owen Lewis knows more about anyone else, I think, about how you get these buildings right, and I think his brains are starting to filter down through into the various organisations, and I'm confident we will adapt a very good scheme here, based on the sort of schemes that they've already done in the UK and the US. I'm conscious of time here now, Chairman, pull me up if I'm not too long-winded. Just two other developments I wanted to mention one other development in the heat area. There's a whole range of different things I could talk about. But I think there's been a very significant development in recent months in our whole research agenda. We set out with an Energy Research Council looking at where do we need to concentrate our resources. We can't be all things to all people, we have to be specialised. And we saw obviously there were 2 or 3 areas where we felt we had to concentrate. The areas the likes of renewables integration, the likes of getting good energy management systems in our homes, or improving building efficiency, the likes of ocean energy. I'm very glad to see that we've seen in recent months real developments in that area, particularly involving the private sector as well as the government. The decision by IBM to set up their global kind of centre for smart cities research development was hugely significant for this city and this country. It didn't get the attention it deserved. One of the leading kind of communications, data management companies in the world putting their core business in terms of data management towards a more sustainable planet here. And that was really beneficial, because I'm looking forward to work with those sort of people in our own domestic environment, to use Ireland as a test location to try and develop some needed solutions, and then obviously everyone can deploy them elsewhere. Similarly, the decision by National Technologies recently to establish or to work with us and the Tyndall Institute down in Cork on the establishment of a European Energy Research Centre specialising in that area where you use microelectronic communication systems within the home to improve energy efficiency systems was very significant, and it's only the start of what we see is a real cluster of energy research and industry collaboration that sees Ireland as a very advanced country in the deployment or in the delivery of new applications in energy efficiency. And I think it is, while I mentioned the kind of development of Tyndall down in Cork, it will be essential that the work we're doing in UCD, the likes of the Energy Research Centre there, Mark O'Malley's work in renewables integration, is incorporated, and I think it will be incorporated into that quite effectively. So we have an end-to-end research industry collaboration from a country with a very high renewables component, which has started to get a very good integrated grid system to manage that, ranging from the power system right down to the home, to the electric kettle. So there's been some developments in that space in recent months that are just the planting of the acorns that I think are actually going to be very significant developments economically for this country, and also for energy research policy internationally as well as in Ireland. We are actually very well placed. It was interesting, we had the US Embassy hold a major event recently with some of our energy people. It was concentrated in the ocean energy area, but I just had a sense there that the Americans went home thinking, actually these guys are doing some interesting stuff and we're in the right sort of direction. So that research agenda, I think in a number of instances has started to look quite good. On transport, and I'm only just glazing over issues here because obviously I want to cover the broad agenda. We can pick up on any details afterwards. In biofuels, we've just passed our biofuels legislation, moving towards an obligation system. I'm very sensitive around this because you've got to make sure we don't distort all sorts of land use, food, international trends. But I think the European Union has by and large got it right in putting in reviews in 2014, in looking for really strong sustainability criteria so that we are sensitive to what's actually happening as we develop our strategic reserve of our strategic use of biofuels as a security blanket, as it were, in face of potential future oil shocks. So we've got our legislation in place. Nora will be responsible for putting it into play, putting it into reality now. It's complex, it's a complex enough market mechanism, but I'm fairly confident that the legislation is robust and that for the players in the market it should work well. Can I just say something for the Green Party government in terms of actually delivering change? And there was just one figure the other day I got it, and because we got a lot of criticism, you know, we made some changes in the car tax system a year or two ago, and it was all, the world was coming to an end, we destroyed the Irish motor industry, things were desperate. And I got a figure the other day. The average Irish new car, and some of these changes are due to the downturn, like Range Rovers are powered, the big heavy SUVs are not as fashionable maybe as they would have been a few years ago, but the change is still fundamental. The average new car 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago in Ireland was 165 grams, I think it was, per kilometre efficiency. With some of the tax changes we've introduced, based on sort of the good sense that Avery Lovins has, that you actually make the cleaner cars cheaper and you pay for it by making the dirtier cars more expensive. The average new car in Ireland is now down to, I think, 132 grams per kilometre CO2 emissions per kilometre. And that's just in 3 years. I just think that's a really good example of how you can actually change things quite quickly with some measures that still allow the market to work, but actually work in a cleverer way. It's just an example of what you can do in a fairly short space of time. What, 25%, 20% improvement in efficiency, which will pay back those car owners for years to come. I started with electric vehicles because I think we have done some good work in that area. The fact that the ESB is now out, starting its rollout of a national grid of charging, plug-in charge points. I think probably ourselves in Portugal are the only 2 countries that have that national infrastructure. Okay, in the UK and elsewhere, they're looking at some city spots and so on, but we actually have a real chance of a national infrastructure first. I think we have a fairly good distribution grid to manage some of the information, the data management that's going to be needed to make that work. We have really good memorandums of associations signed now with Renault Nissan, with Mitsubishi. I'm off to Japan next week to meet some of the other companies, and indeed to China after that to meet some other people, because I think they're starting to see internationally that actually this is one of the countries that would be a good place to come to actually get the technology work through. And what I see the economic opportunity for us, as well as in the long run having an electric fleet, would be very useful to balance our renewable system and improve our energy security. But the real immediate advantage and strategic opportunity is to develop all the software and process management systems that will be needed to make this work here. And that's what we do well. You know, Ryanair's success, whatever they gave out $500 million yesterday, was in process innovation, was in systems management. The world's going to need this for electric vehicles. And we have most of the leading IT companies here, as well as very good basic software companies here. And I'm saying to them, this is a business opportunity, folks. Come in and work out the data management and software and process management systems, billing systems around this technology, because whoever has that expertise will have a tradable commodity. Lastly, but not least, power generation. We're in the middle, we have a carbon levy which went through started its second stage in Dáil last night. We have a fairly tight timeline to get through it by July to kick in the autumn. And it's, I know for certain utilities that it's not going to be easier, that there'll be questions about it. But ultimately, it is following on some of the, or it's following through on a number of different measures we've done, and the ESB by and large have done a lot of lifting to try and manage our electricity system in a regulated market in an effective way. One of the other thoughts I have, just a very broad one, is that, and this comes out of the ministerial meeting last Monday, our regulated market structure from the European Union has served us well. I believe the regulator is doing a good job, and I think it serves this country well. We were lucky to be in Europe that kind of pushed us into a proper regulated market system. And it is working, it's a competitive market. I mean, that pressure that came on about a year ago because our prices were high was very real. It forced us to really look closely at what was happening in the market and what we could do. And one of the main senses I had coming out of it is we have a competitive market here in electricity. And that's, I think, to the good of all players. And we will be absolutely committed in government to maintaining a fair, properly regulated market for electricity. Not favoring one country or company over another at all, because I think that actually a good competitive market serves us well. We're set, as I said, we've passed the 15% renewables target we set ourselves for this year. It's going to be more difficult to get up to the 40%, but it's doable. And all the analysis we're doing, all the follow-on further analysis is showing actually 40% is possible. It makes economic sense. It is constrained, or the biggest constraint, I suppose, is the grid, whether we can get our grid built and get our planning system functioning in a way that helps us deliver that target. But subject to the grid being built, we will get there, and then we have to go further. Just lastly then, I'll be very brief. Going further, going to 2050, where are we going? Because it is time now, the European Union is doing it, and we need to do it, because energy you have to think long term. When I see 2050, I see us being a renewables energy exporter. The resource we have, the scale of the resource we have, particularly in our ocean area, is a quantum of what we need to use ourselves. As Peter Halligan has been saying, the simple metaphor, look at what Whittaker said in the 50s, saw our comparative advantage in grass growing, thought we could turn that into a food industry, which we have, that is now an €8 billion exporting industry for this country. We need a similar sense of ambition and urgency and vision in energy, I believe, to actually set a similar objective for ourselves to convert the natural resources we have in renewable power particularly into an exporting industry. And that one that can help our European neighbours. The other thing that's happening in the Council of Ministers, as I sense it, is a fairly agreed sense that we have to consolidate, integrate European gas and electricity markets. It's starting to happen. It's in the last 2 years, the kind of nationalised islands of grids mentality has broken down, and there's a real recognition, and all the talk in our European Council meetings, the last 3, have been dominated by the issue about how do we build interconnected grids across Europe? How do we build this supergrid in the northwestern Atlantic waters that will help us deliver this renewables energy potential? That's number 1 item on the agenda for the last 3 meetings we've had. And I have a very strong view that we should be getting European Union funding to support such an investment, because ultimately the markets are not going to be able to do it because they're very short-term thinking in their way, and national governments won't be easily able to do it because it's very hard to get the Minister of Finance to allow you to put up the price of electricity to commit to a European integration project. So I'm arguing in Europe quite strongly that we should get European funding as part of the revision of European funding that's coming after 2014 to support such grids. We've done some good analysis already. EirGrid have shown that the actual development of interconnectors, as well as the one that EirGrid is building at the present time, future integration to the UK makes energy sense for us. Flows, the energy flow systems look very good, two-way flows going both ways. Similarly to France, there's a real opportunity for us to use this new HVDC technology to give us a more stable system, to start that exporting opportunity, and to start to connect it up with offshore grids which actually tap into our ocean energy power, be it wave or offshore wind or tidal. Now that's a long-term vision. It's not going to be happening overnight. It's going to take, we're thinking 2020 onwards here. But if we don't start it now, if we don't get the funding for those interconnectors and for the grid from 2014 onwards, it won't happen. And I believe that this is actually probably one of the big projects, one of the big vision things for this country that actually can lift our economy, can give us a sense of purpose, a sense that there's a future that is truly sustainable. We're going to a meeting in Guernsey, a second meeting of the British Irish Council on this very issue later this month. The 10 European countries in northwestern Europe have signed a memorandum of understanding, an agreement around this vision of how northwest Europe could develop that offshore grid and energy. We're working towards a more detailed memorandum of understanding by the end of this year. This is very real. This is at the centre of European policy thinking, and we, I'm glad to say, are at the centre of that thinking as well. Thank you.